In the gilded heart of the celestial spire, a palace carved from living crystal and suspended above the emerald storms of Varelli's prime, the air shimmered with tension thicker than the queen's ceremonial veil. Queen Xeris IV, sovereign of the verdant dominion, lounged upon her throne of fused moonstone and dragonbone, her green skin gleaming under the twin suns that filtered through the palace's prismatic dome. Her white hair, long and braided with threads of liquid silver, cascaded over one shoulder like a frozen waterfall, and her golden eyes, sharp as obsidian daggers, glinted with amusement as she surveyed the latest addition to her royal guard. He stood barely shoulder-high to the armored sentinels flanking the throne dais, a human named Joran, not particularly broad, not especially fearsome, clad in a simple tunic of deep indigo stitched with the insignia of the Alliance Accord. His dark eyes held no bravado, only quiet resolve, and his hands, calloused but clean, rested loosely at his sides. The courtiers tittered behind jeweled fans. The royal advisors exchanged glances dripping with condescension. Even the palace hounds, sleek reptilian beasts with iridescent scales, yawned in disinterest. "You're too tiny to be my guard," Queen Xeris laughed, her voice a melody laced with mockery. It echoed through the chamber, bouncing off walls that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins. "Did the Alliance send me a child by mistake? Or perhaps a misplaced scribe?" Joran didn't flinch. He simply bowed, low and precise, the way Alliance diplomats had taught him during his years stationed on the border worlds. "Your Majesty," he said, voice calm but firm. "I was assigned by High Command after your last guard captain was compromised by the Shadow Coil. I may be small, but I've walked through fire you've only heard whispered in nightmares." The queen arched a perfect white brow. "Fire? How poetic. But poetry doesn't stop a blade." She flicked a slender finger toward the far end of the hall. "Prove it, little man. 9 of my elite hunters wait in the outer ring. They've been instructed to test your worthiness." A ripple of anticipation swept through the court. The hunters of the Verdant Dominion were no ordinary warriors. Clad in armor woven from hardened vine fiber and scaled hide, they moved like shadows given muscle and malice. Each stood over 8 feet tall, green-skinned like their queen but with eyes like smoldering coals and tusks jutting from their lower jaws. They carried serrated glaives that hummed with bioelectric charge, weapons capable of slicing through durasteel. Joran exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. The first hunter lunged before Joran had even crossed halfway. A blur of muscle and malice, the glaive whistling through the air like a death song. But Joran wasn't there. He dropped low, rolled beneath the strike, and came up inside the hunter's guard. A single, precise strike to the throat, just below the jaw, snapped the vertebrae with a sickening crunch. The hunter collapsed without a sound, his glaive clattering to the floor. Gasps erupted. The queen's laughter died on her lips. The second and third hunters charged together, their movements synchronized from years of blood-bonded combat. Joran sidestepped the first, using the momentum of his dodge to drive his elbow into the second's solar plexus. As the wind left the brute's lungs, Joran snatched the glaive from the fallen hunter and spun. The blade flashed, a silver arc, and severed the tendons behind the first attacker's knees. The hunter screamed, crashing to the ground. Now the court was silent. Even the palace's ambient hum seemed to pause. The remaining 6 hunters spread out, circling Joran like vultures. They knew now this was no joke. This human was death wrapped in humility. One fainted high while another struck low. Joran parried the high strike with the glaive, then dropped to one knee, sweeping the legs of the low attacker. Before the fallen hunter could rise, Joran stomped on his windpipe. For left, they came in a storm of fury. Claws, blades, and raw muscle converged on him. But Joran moved like water, flowing, redirecting, never resisting head-on. He used their aggression against them. One hunter swung wide. Joran ducked, drove his shoulder into the brute's ribs, then twisted the glaive upward through the armpit into the heart. Another tried to grapple him from behind. Joran flipped backward over the hunter's shoulders, landed on his feet, and snapped the alien's neck with a brutal twist before he hit the ground. 2 remained. These were the deadliest, silent, calculating. They didn't roar or charge. They waited, watching Joran's breath, his stance, his eyes. The chamber felt colder now, the light dimmer, as if the palace itself held its breath. Joran tossed aside the glaive, now slick with green ichor, and drew a short, curved blade from his belt. Not Alliance issue. This was older, personal. The metal shimmered with faint runes, humming softly. The first of the two lunged, not with a slash, but a thrust aimed at Joran's eye. Joran sidestepped, caught the hunter's wrist, and drove his blade into the joint of the elbow. The hunter roared, stumbling back. Before he could recover, Joran kicked the back of his knee, forced him to his knees, and drove the blade through the base of his skull. One left. The final hunter stood motionless, breathing hard. His eyes locked with Joran's. There was no hatred there, only respect, and something deeper, fear. "You fight like the old ones," the hunter rasped in halting common. "The ones who walked the glass wastes before the Dominion rose." Joran didn't answer. He simply nodded, then moved. It was over in less than a heartbeat. A feint left, a pivot right, a palm strike to the sternum that cracked bone, followed by a knife-hand chop to the carotid. The hunter swayed, then fell like a felled tree. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Joran stood amidst the carnage, breathing steadily, his clothes stained with alien blood, his face unreadable. He turned toward the throne, sheathed his blade, and bowed again, deeper this time. Queen Xerxes hadn't moved. Her golden eyes were wide, her lips parted slightly. The mockery was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Fascination. "You?" she began, then stopped, as if unsure how to finish. She rose from her throne, her white hair catching the light like spun starlight. "You are not what I expected." "No, your majesty," Joran said simply. "Few people are." She descended the dais slowly, her bare feet silent on the polished floor. The courtiers shrank back, unsure whether to flee or kneel. She stopped just an arm's length from him, studying his face as if reading a map to a forgotten world. "Tell me your story, little guard," she murmured. "Not the one the Alliance gave you, the real one." Joran hesitated. He'd spent years burying that story beneath layers of duty and discipline. But something in her gaze, curious, unguarded, almost vulnerable, made the walls crack. "I was born on a mining colony orbiting a dead star," he began, voice low. "My parents were engineers. We weren't soldiers. But when the Void Reavers came, merciless, ravenous, they didn't care. They slaughtered everyone. Everyone except me. I was hidden in a maintenance shaft, listening to my mother scream until it stopped." He looked away, jaw tight. "I was 8. I crawled out 3 days later. Found a Reaver scout still looting the ruins. I killed him with a plasma torch and a broken pipe. After that, I never stopped fighting." Queen Xerxes reached out, her long fingers hovering just above his cheek, not quite touching. "And yet you serve the Alliance? The same powers that abandoned your colony." "They didn't abandon us," Joran said, meeting her eyes again. "They just didn't know we existed. I joined to make sure no one else suffers in silence." A strange expression crossed her face, something between sorrow and admiration. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Not the mocking laugh from before, but a genuine, warm smile that softened the sharp angles of her regal features. "You may be tiny," she said softly, "but your heart is vast." From that day on, Joran was no longer just a guard. He became the queen's shadow, her confidant, her shield against the knives, both literal and political, that lurked in every corridor of the celestial spire. The courtiers who once sneered now bowed deeply when he passed. The palace hounds nuzzled his hand. Even the surviving hunters nodded in silent respect. But danger never sleeps in royal courts. Weeks later, during the Festival of Twin Moons, a celebration marking the Dominion's founding, an assassin struck, not with brute force but with poison. A goblet meant for the queen was laced with neurotoxin derived from the venom of the sky serpents of Xylos. Only Joran's sharp eyes caught the faint shimmer in the wine. He intercepted the cup just in time, knocking it from the server's hands before the queen could drink. The server, a young servant with nervous eyes, was seized immediately. Under interrogation, he confessed. He'd been paid by a faction within the royal council, nobles who feared the queen's growing alliance with the human-led coalition. They believed her compassion for offworlders would weaken the Dominion. Queen Xerxes was furious, but Joran saw something else in her rage. Grief. Betrayal cut deeper than any blade. That night, she summoned him to her private observatory, a domed chamber at the very peak of the spire, where the stars seemed close enough to touch. She stood by the curved window, wrapped in a robe of woven moonmoth silk, her white hair loose and glowing faintly in the starlight. "They were my cousins," she said without turning. "Raised in the same nursery, shared the same tutors. And yet, They would see me dead for speaking to humans. Joran stood a respectful distance away. Power makes monsters of good people, your majesty. She turned then, her golden eyes searching his. Do you think I'm a monster for wanting peace? No, he said without hesitation. I think you're brave. Braver than most warriors I've known. She stepped closer. Then stay with me, Joran. Not just as my guard. As someone I can trust. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. He felt his pulse quicken. Not from fear, but from something warmer, more terrifying. I'm already here, your majesty, he said quietly. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cool, smooth, alien, and yet it felt right. Natural. Like two pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. But their moment was shattered by the blare of alarms. Red light flooded the observatory. The palace AI's voice echoed through the corridors. Intruder alert. Breach in the eastern wing. Hostile signatures detected. Shadow Coil operatives. The Shadow Coil, the same terrorist cell that had infiltrated the previous guard. They'd returned. Queen Xeris' expression hardened. They won't take this palace, she hissed. Joran drew his blade. Then we stopped them. Together, they raced through the winding corridors of the spire, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and murals of cosmic creation. The sounds of combat grew louder. Energy blasts, screams, the clash of steel. When they reached the throne room, chaos reigned. Shadow Coil assassins, clad in black, their faces hidden behind respirators that hissed with toxic gas, had overwhelmed the outer guards. They moved with terrifying precision, their weapons modified to bypass Dominion armor. At their center stood a figure taller than the rest, clad in obsidian armor etched with crimson runes. Their leader. Vor! The leader bellowed, voice distorted by the mask. Your reign ends tonight. The Dominion will return to purity, without human filth. Queen Xeris stepped forward, her hands glowing with emerald energy. The royal bloodline's gift, the ability to channel bioluminal force. You speak of purity while hiding behind masks. Cowards. The leader raised a gauntlet, and dark energy crackled around it. We are the storm that purifies. Joran didn't wait. He charged. What followed was a whirlwind of violence and light. Joran darted between assassins, his blade a blur, cutting through limbs and throats with lethal grace. Queen Xeris unleashed torrents of emerald energy, shattering armor and sending enemies flying. Together, they fought as one, human and alien, small and mighty, heart and will aligned. But the leader was strong, faster than the others. He matched Joran blow for blow, his strength unnatural. During a lull in the fight, he ripped off his mask and revealed a face Joran knew. It was Kalen Vor, the queen's exiled half-brother, banished years ago for attempting to overthrow her using forbidden biotech. Sister? Kalen sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. Still playing house with your pet human? Xeris' face twisted in pain. You were my blood, and you chose darkness. I chose survival, Kalen spat, while you waste our legacy on treaties and hand-holding. He lunged at her, but Joran intercepted, their blades clashing with sparks. The fight was brutal, desperate. Joran was tiring. Kalen fought with the fury of betrayal and ambition. Just as Kalen gained the upper hand, his blade inches from Joran's throat, Xeris did something unexpected. She didn't attack. She spoke. Do you remember the garden, Kalen? When we were children, you used to bring me star blossoms every morning. Kalen froze. For a heartbeat, the mask of rage slipped. That was a lifetime ago. It's still here, she whispered, touching her chest. In me. In you. Don't throw it away. Tears welled in Kalen's eyes, but then his expression hardened again. Too late, sister. He raised his blade, but before he could strike, the floor beneath him gave way. The palace's defense systems, activated by Joran's earlier signal, had targeted the intruders. Kalen fell into a containment shaft, sealed beneath layers of reinforced crystal. Silence returned, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Joran helped the queen to her feet. She was bleeding from a gash on her arm, but her eyes were clear. He'll escape, she said softly. He always does. Then we'll be ready, Joran replied. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment the last wall between them crumbled. You called me sister once, she said almost shyly. Would you call me Xeris? He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Only if you call me Joran. Outside, the twin moons of Vareli's prime rose over the emerald storms, casting silver light across the celestial spire. Inside, two souls, human and alien, guard and queen, stood together, not as ruler and protector, but as equals. The war wasn't over. Kalen would return. The shadow coil would regroup. The court would scheme. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of battle, there was trust. There was hope. And perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of something far more powerful than either of them had ever imagined. Weeks passed like whispers in the wind, but peace in the celestial spire was never more than a fragile illusion. Though the palace had been cleansed of Kalen's assassins and the court publicly reaffirmed its loyalty to Queen Xeris, Joran felt the tension coiling beneath the surface like a sleeping serpent. The nobles smiled too broadly, bowed too deeply, and spoke in hushed tones that died the moment he entered a room. He said nothing to Xeris. Not yet. But he watched, listened, and remembered every flicker of deceit in their golden eyes. Then came the dreams. Not his own, but hers. Xeris began waking in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, her white hair tangled like storm-whipped vines. She refused to speak of them at first, but one evening, as they stood together on the palace's highest balcony watching the auroras ripple across Vareli's prime sky, she finally broke. "He's not just alive, Joran," she said, her voice trembling. "He's inside my mind." Joran turned sharply. "Kalen?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself as if cold despite the warm night air. "Since the night he fell into the containment shaft, I felt echoes, fragments of his thoughts. At first I thought it was guilt, but last night I saw through his eyes. He's in the glass wastes, the forbidden zone beyond the spire's reach. And he's not alone." Joran's blood ran cold. The glass wastes were more than a desert. They were a graveyard of ancient biotech, remnants of the Dominion's first war against the synthetic hive known as the Echo Collective. Nothing survived there for long, least of all exiled royals, unless they'd made a pact with something worse. Before they could act, a new crisis erupted. The Alliance fleet stationed in orbit around Vareli's prime sent an urgent transmission. Their comms had gone dark. Not just malfunctioning, wiped clean, as if memory itself had been erased. Worse, scans showed strange energy signatures pulsing from the planet's southern pole, where no Dominion settlements existed. Xeris ordered an investigation. Joran insisted on leading it. They took a cloaked skiff, slipping past orbital patrols and descending through swirling emerald storms until they touched down on a barren plateau of black glass. Smooth, reflective, and humming with residual energy. The air smelled of ozone and something older, metallic and sour, like rusted blood. There, half buried in the glass, lay the wreckage of an Alliance scout vessel. But it wasn't destroyed by weapons fire. The hull was grown over, veins of pulsating organic circuitry snaking across the metal, fusing ship and soil into something grotesquely alive. And standing amidst the wreckage, cloaked in tattered robes that shimmered with the same bioluminescent patterns as the vines, was Kalen. He looked different. Thinner, yes, but his eyes glowed faintly violet, and his skin bore faint traceries of silver, like circuitry beneath the surface. When he saw them, he didn't attack. He smiled. "Sister," he said, voice layered with something not entirely his own. "You came." Xeris stepped forward, hand raised, emerald energy crackling at her fingertips. "What have you done, Kalen?" "I've awakened what you buried," he replied. "The Echo Collective never died. It slumbered, and I've given it a new voice." Joran moved to stand beside Xeris, blade drawn. "You're infected." "Enlightened," Kalen corrected. "The Collective doesn't conquer. It integrates. It offers unity without war, order without chaos. And it sees your alliance with humans as a disease to be purged." Before Joran could respond, the ground trembled. From fissures in the glass, tendrils of living metal erupted, writhing, seeking. The scout ship's hull split open, and from within emerged figures, Alliance soldiers, their eyes vacant, their skin threaded with the same silver circuitry. They moved in perfect unison, weapons raised not at Joran, but at Xeris. "Run!" Joran shouted, shoving her behind him. But Xeris didn't run. She raised both hands, and a wave of emerald light erupted from her body, shattering the nearest drones into molten slag. Yet for every one destroyed, two more emerged from the earth. Kalen watched, arms crossed, as if observing an experiment. "You can't win, sister," The collective has already infiltrated the Spire's neural network. Your palace is listening. Your guards are dreaming. Soon they'll wake and obey. Joran's mind raced. If the collective was inside the palace's systems, then Xeris wasn't safe anywhere, not even in her own throne room. And if it had compromised Alliance tech, the entire coalition could be at risk. They fought their way back to the skiff, barely escaping as the plateau collapsed into a churning maw of biomechanical horror. As they soared back toward the spire, Xeris clutched Joran's arm, her voice raw. "He's not just using the collective," she whispered. "He's bonded with its core intelligence. That's why I can feel him. We share the same blood and now the same neural frequency." Back in the palace, they found chaos. Half the royal guard stood motionless in the grand hall, eyes glowing violet, repeating a single phrase in unison. "Unity is peace. Resistance is decay." The courtiers had barricaded themselves in the inner sanctum, but even there, the walls pulsed faintly with silver veins. Worse still, the palace AI, once a loyal steward, now spoke in Kaelin's voice. "Surrender, sister." It echoed through every corridor. "Join us. Become eternal." Xeris collapsed to her knees, clutching her head. "It's in me," she gasped. "It's trying to rewrite my thoughts." Joran knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Look at me. You're Xeris IV, Queen of the Verdant Dominion. You chose peace, not control. That's your strength, not your bloodline, not your power. You." She looked up, tears streaking her green cheeks. "What if I lose myself? Then I'll pull you back," he said fiercely. Every time. In that moment, he made a decision. There was one place in the palace the collective couldn't reach, the Heart Vault, a sealed chamber beneath the throne room where the Dominion's oldest artifact lay. The seed of Alara, a crystalline core said to contain the original consciousness of their first queen. Legend claimed it could sever any unnatural bond, at a cost. "The seed requires a life to activate," Xeris warned when he told her his plan. "Not just any life. A willing sacrifice." "I know," Joran said. "No," she said sharply. "I won't let you." "You don't have a choice," he replied gently. "If the collective takes you, the Dominion falls. If it spreads to the Alliance, billions die. This isn't about bravery, Xeris. It's about necessity." She tried to argue, to command, to beg, but he silenced her with a kiss. Soft, brief, and filled with everything words couldn't say. Then he ran. Through corridors now alive with twitching vines and whispering walls. Past guards whose eyes tracked him with mechanical precision. Joran reached the Heart Vault. The door recognized his biometrics. Xeris had granted him full access weeks ago, a trust he'd never forgotten. Inside, the seed floated in a column of light, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. It was beautiful and terrifying, humming with ancient power. Joran placed his hand on the activation glyph. "For Xeris," he whispered. Energy surged through him, white-hot, searing. His vision blurred. Memories flashed. His parents' faces, the mining colony burning. The first time he saw Xeris laugh, the way her hand felt in his. He didn't regret a single moment. But just as the seed began to glow brighter, a voice echoed in the chamber. Not Kaelin's, not the collective's. "Wait!" Xeris stood in the doorway, breathless, eyes blazing with emerald fire. Behind her, the palace trembled, the collective's presence recoiling as if sensing the seed's awakening. "You think I'd let you die for me?" she demanded, striding forward. "I am your queen, Joran, not your burden." Before he could stop her, she placed her hand over his on the glyph. "The seed doesn't need a life," she said, voice steady now. "It needs a bond, and ours is stronger than anything Kaelin or the collective can forge." Together, they activated the seed. Light exploded, not white, but a swirling fusion of emerald and gold. It raced through the palace, through the planet's crust, through the very air. Where it touched, the silver circuitry blackened and crumbled. The possessed guards collapsed, groaning as the foreign presence fled their minds. In orbit, the Alliance fleet rebooted, systems purged. And deep in the glass wastes, Kaelin screamed as the collective's grip tore from his mind. He fell to his knees, human again, broken, alone, and finally free. When the light faded, Joran and Xeris stood hand in hand in the silent vault. The palace was quiet, truly quiet, but their victory was short-lived. Days later, as they walked through the restored gardens, now blooming with star blossoms for the first time in decades, a transmission arrived from the outer rim, a distress call, not from the Alliance, Not from any known world. It came from a derelict station orbiting a black hole, broadcasting on a frequency no one had used in centuries. And the voice was human. Any survivors? This is Captain Rail Torin of the Star Warden. We found something. Something that shouldn't exist. It's calling your name, Queen Xeris. Joran exchanged a glance with Xeris. Her golden eyes narrowed, not with fear, but with grim recognition. That frequency, she murmured. It's the same one my mother used before she vanished. The mystery deepened. The war with the collective might be over, but something older, something tied to Xeris' bloodline and the true origins of the Dominion, was stirring in the void. And it knew her name. As the twin suns set over the spire, casting long shadows across the crystal towers, Joran squeezed Xeris' hand. Whatever it is, he said, we face it together. She leaned into him, her white hair catching the last light of day. Always, far above, the stars watched and waited. The distress signal from the derelict station hung in the air like a ghost. But Xeris and Joran didn't rush. They'd learned the hard way that some truths needed time to surface, and some wounds needed healing before they could be reopened. In the quiet weeks that followed the purging of the collective, the celestial spire began to breathe again. Vines receded from the walls. The palace AI spoke in its own voice once more. And the people, both Dominion and the handful of Alliance diplomats who'd remained, looked at their queen not with fear, but with awe. Xeris, for her part, changed. She no longer ruled from the cold height of her moonstone throne but walked the lower halls, spoke with gardeners and engineers, even shared meals with off-world traders. And always at her side was Joran. Not as a guard in uniform, but as her equal, her confidant, her heart. The court whispered, of course. A human and a verdant queen? Unthinkable. But then they saw how she laughed when he told dry, understated jokes only she seemed to understand. How he stood a little taller when she entered a room. How, during the Festival of Renewal, a quiet ceremony held after the collective's defeat, they stood beneath the twin moons and exchanged not vows, but promises. I will never hide from you. I will never choose power over you. I will walk with you, even into the dark. It was enough. When they finally answered the signal from the black hole's edge, they went not as queen and guard, but as partners. The Star Warden was indeed a ghost ship, drifting, half consumed by time, its corridors lined with frozen memories. Captain Rail Torin, gaunt and gray-haired but alive, met them at the airlock with tears in his eyes. I served your mother, Xeris, he said, voice cracking. She didn't vanish. She sacrificed herself to seal the rift, the tear in reality the ancient Dominion tried to weaponize. She became its anchor, and now it's weakening. Deep in the station's core they found it. A shimmering tear in space, held closed by a lattice of crystalline energy, and at its center, suspended in stasis, was Queen Lyra Vor, Xeris' mother. Not dead, not alive, waiting. The choice was agonizing. To free her would risk unleashing the rift, a cataclysm capable of unraveling entire star systems. But to leave her was to abandon the woman who'd given everything for peace. It was Joran who found the answer. The seed of Alara, he said. It doesn't just sever bonds, it can weave new ones. What if we don't close the rift, but stabilize it? Anchor it not to a person, but to the seed itself. Xeris stared at him, then at her mother's serene face. It would require merging the seed with the rift's core, and someone would have to guide the fusion from inside. I'll do it, Joran said instantly. No, Xeris replied, her voice soft but firm. This is my bloodline's burden. My choice. But Joran took her hands. You're not alone anymore. Let me stand with you, not in front, not behind. With you. Together they entered the rift's chamber. Hand in hand, they channeled the seed's energy into the tear. Light and shadow swirled around them, time bending like silk. For a moment, Xeris saw her mother smile. Then, with a final pulse of emerald gold light, the rift sealed. Not with sacrifice, but with harmony. Queen Lyra awoke. The reunion was quiet, tearful, filled with decades of lost words. But when Lyra looked at Joran, she didn't see a human outsider. She saw the man who'd saved her daughter's soul, her kingdom, and now, her life. You've given her what I never could, Lyra told him that night, under the stars of a safe, whole sky. A love that doesn't command, it chooses. Back on Vareli's prime, the people celebrated not just the return of their former queen, but the union of two worlds. Xeris and Joran were married in the Heart Garden, the same place where Kaelin had once brought her star blossoms as a child. The ceremony was simple. No crowns, no thrones, just 2 rings forged from the melted glaive of the first hunter Joran had defeated, and a vow spoken beneath the blooming vines. "I choose you," Xerxes said, "not as my guard, not as my subject, but as my partner in every sunrise to come." "And I choose you," Joran replied, "not as my queen, but as the woman who taught me that strength isn't size, it's heart." Years flowed like rivers after that. They ruled not from fear, but from compassion. The Alliance and the Verdant Dominion signed the Eternal Accord, opening embassies, schools, even shared research outposts on the glass wastes, now a place of study, not dread. Kaelin, humbled and healed, became a scholar, dedicating his life to understanding the mistakes of the past so others wouldn't repeat them. Joran never stopped training the Royal Guard, though now he taught them more than combat. He taught them empathy, restraint, the value of a life spared. And Xerxes never stopped listening. To her people, to the stars, to the quiet voice of the man who walked beside her through every storm. They had children. A daughter with Xerxes' golden eyes and Joran's quiet courage, and a son with green skin and dark, thoughtful eyes who could fix a plasma core before he could walk. The palace echoed with laughter, with arguments over star charts and bedtime stories, with the soft sound of 2 hearts beating in time. On clear nights, they still stood on the highest balcony, watching the auroras dance. Sometimes, Joran would pull Xerxes close and whisper, "Remember when you said I was too tiny to be your guard?" And she would laugh, that warm, real laugh he'd fallen in love with, and say, "You were never tiny, my love. You were just waiting for the right moment to be enormous." And in each other's arms, beneath the endless sky of a world they'd saved together, they lived not as legend, not as myth, but as 2 souls who chose each other, again and again, until the stars themselves grew old. And they were happy, truly, deeply, wonderfully happy, for the rest of their long, shared life. Years melted into decades, and the celestial spire bloomed with peace only earned through shared sacrifice. Xerxes and Joran ruled not as monarch and guard, but as partners, equal in voice, in vision, in love. Their union became a bridge between species, healing old wounds and forging new alliances among stars. The Verdant Dominion flourished, its gardens spilling over with alien blossoms and human laughter alike. Kaelin, redeemed and quiet, tended the royal archives, ensuring history's shadows would never again swallow the light. Their children, Lyragen and Torin, grew wise and kind, raised on stories of courage, not conquest. Joran still trained the guard, but now his lessons began with, "Protect the peace, not just the throne." Xerxes walked the markets unescorted, known not for her power, but her kindness. On quiet evenings, they returned to the Heart Garden, where star blossoms glowed softly under twin moons. They held hands, gray threading Joran's dark hair, silver shimmering in Xerxes' white locks, and spoke little, needing no words after a lifetime of understanding. The palace no longer echoed with intrigue, but with music, debate, and the joyful chaos of grandchildren racing through crystal halls. When the last of their days came, they faced them not with fear, but with gratitude for time, for each other, for a love that changed a galaxy. And long after they were gone, their legacy lived on. In laws written with mercy, in treaties sealed with trust, and in every child who dared to believe that even the smallest heart could guard a queen and win her forever.